It started with a notification almost anyone would ignore. A buyer had sent a message through Facebook Marketplace asking to meet and purchase an item. The conversation seemed ordinary. The price was agreed. The location was set. And just like millions of marketplace transactions every year, it looked completely routine. But within hours, that simple exchange turned into a homicide investigation that would eventually make national headlines. As detectives reconstructed deleted messages, tracked digital footprints, analyzed surveillance footage, and uncovered forensic evidence, they realized this wasn't a deal that had gone wrong. It was a carefully planned crime. The deeper investigators looked, the more disturbing the truth became, proving that sometimes the most dangerous traps begin with the most ordinary message. On the morning of July 6, 2024, a quiet neighborhood in Fenton Township, Michigan, was interrupted by a sound that no one expected to hear: gunshots. Neighbors looked outside, but saw only fragments of what had happened: an unfamiliar orange Camaro, a man leaving a driveway in a hurry, and a house that had suddenly fallen silent. Inside the garage, 38-year-old Orhan Hozik lay mortally wounded. Just hours earlier, he had been doing something millions of people do every day: meeting a buyer from Facebook Marketplace to sell a pair of Corvette seats. It was supposed to be a simple transaction. Instead, it became the beginning of a murder investigation that would make headlines across the country. When detectives first arrived, nothing about the scene suggested a random break-in. The meeting had been planned. The buyer had been invited to the house. There were no signs of forced entry. Whoever pulled the trigger hadn't stumbled across the victim by chance. He had come there for a reason. But what detectives couldn't understand was how an ordinary online sale had ended in such extreme violence. At first, robbery seemed like the obvious explanation. The victim's phone was missing. Some of the car parts he had been selling were gone. Yet as investigators began piecing together the evidence, they realized this case wasn't following the pattern of a typical robbery. Something else had happened inside that garage. Something that would only become clear as the investigation unfolded. To understand why the case shocked so many people, you have to understand who Orhan Hozik was. Friends described him as someone who loved cars. He enjoyed working on vehicles and frequently bought and sold automotive parts online. Facebook Marketplace wasn't unfamiliar to him. Like thousands of enthusiasts across the United States, he regularly met buyers and sellers through the platform. Nothing about this particular sale appeared unusual. The buyer had contacted him about purchasing 2 Corvette seats. A price was agreed upon. A meeting was arranged at Hozik's home. Everything looked routine. It was exactly the kind of transaction people complete every single day without thinking twice, which is what made what happened next so difficult to comprehend. As crime scene investigators processed the garage, detectives began interviewing neighbors. One detail came up repeatedly: an orange Chevrolet Camaro. It wasn't a common sight in the neighborhood. Witnesses remembered seeing it parked outside Hozik's home around the time of the shooting. At that point, detectives didn't know who owned the vehicle, but they knew it was likely the last major clue left behind by the person who had walked away from the crime scene. Sometimes the smallest observation from an ordinary witness becomes the turning point in an investigation. This would prove to be one of those moments. Then investigators began reconstructing the digital trail. Facebook Marketplace messages, pawn records, meeting arrangements. Every communication leading up to the sale was carefully reviewed. Unlike older homicide investigations, modern cases often begin long before detectives arrive at a crime scene. Today, conversations, timestamps, account activity, and digital records can reveal exactly how 2 strangers came into contact. In this case, investigators believed the online communication established a direct connection between the victim and the man who had arrived to buy the Corvette seats. The internet had introduced them. Now it was helping detectives identify one of them. But digital evidence wasn't the only thing investigators found. Inside the garage were bloody shoe prints. At first glance, they looked like just another piece of crime scene evidence. In reality, they would become one of the strongest forensic links in the entire investigation. Crime scene specialists carefully photographed every print before comparing them with evidence collected later during the investigation. Unlike eyewitness testimony, footprints don't forget. They preserve movements, direction, and sometimes identity. The killer had left the garage believing he had escaped unnoticed. He had no idea he had carried evidence away with him. Within days, investigators identified the buyer as Omar Brogdon, but identifying a suspect and proving a murder are two very different things. Detectives needed evidence that would place him inside the garage, connect him to the shooting, and explain what had happened after the first shot was fired. What they would discover over the following days would transform what initially appeared to be a simple marketplace robbery into a case built on forensic science, digital evidence, eyewitness accounts, and one critical mistake the killer never realized he had made. Detectives now had a suspect, but suspicion wasn't enough. To secure a conviction, they had to prove exactly what happened inside that garage, and they needed evidence the defense couldn't explain away. As investigators executed search warrants and continued processing the crime scene, the physical evidence began telling its own story. The bloody shoe impressions recovered from the garage became a critical focus. Forensic experts compared those impressions with shoes connected to Omar Brogdon. According to prosecutors, the patterns and other evidence placed him inside the garage during the attack, directly contradicting any suggestion that he had never entered the crime scene. Then detectives recovered another crucial piece of evidence: the victim's missing cell phone. Prosecutors alleged that after the shooting, Brogdon took Hozek's phone as he fled. That wasn't just theft. It helped investigators reconstruct what happened in the minutes immediately following the murder and strengthened the prosecution's timeline. But investigators believed the motive wasn't simply robbery. As witnesses were interviewed and evidence was reviewed, prosecutors argued that a dispute had erupted during the marketplace transaction. According to the prosecution, what should have been an ordinary sale escalated into a heated confrontation. Within moments, a firearm was drawn, shots were fired, and Orhan Hozek collapsed inside his own garage. What began as a routine online meeting had turned into an act of deadly violence. For detectives, it was another reminder of how quickly an everyday encounter can become irreversible. As the investigation moved toward trial, prosecutors didn't rely on a single dramatic piece of evidence. Instead, they built the case exactly the way many successful homicide prosecutions are built, one fact at a time. Witness statements, digital marketplace communications, the suspect's movements, forensic evidence from the garage, the stolen property. Each piece supported the next. Individually, none of them told the complete story. Together, they formed a timeline that prosecutors argued left very little room for doubt. That methodical approach would become one of the strongest features of the case presented in court. When the trial finally began, jurors heard how an online marketplace transaction had unfolded into a homicide investigation supported by physical and digital evidence. After considering the evidence, the jury found Omar Brogdon guilty of first-degree premeditated murder, armed robbery, felony firearm, and additional related offenses. The verdict brought an end to months of investigation and courtroom testimony, but it could never undo what had happened on that July morning. For Orhan Hozek's family, the conviction provided accountability, but it could never replace the husband, father, son, and friend they had lost. The case also sparked a much broader conversation. Millions of people use Facebook Marketplace every day to buy and sell everything from furniture to electronics and car parts. Most transactions end without incident, but investigators urged the public to take simple precautions. Meet in designated public exchange locations whenever possible. Avoid inviting strangers to your home. Bring another person if you're meeting an unknown buyer. Those recommendations came from lessons learned through cases exactly like this one. In the end, this wasn't a mystery solved by one shocking confession. It wasn't one surveillance camera, or one eyewitness, or one forensic clue. It was solved because detectives refused to overlook the details: a digital conversation, a witness who remembered a distinctive vehicle, footprints left inside a garage, a missing cell phone. Each clue seemed ordinary on its own. Together, they exposed the truth behind what had first appeared to be nothing more than a routine online sale. The Facebook Marketplace murder shocked the nation not only because of how it ended, but because it began with something almost everyone has done: a simple message from a stranger. Cases like this remind us that danger doesn't always arrive wearing a mask. Sometimes it appears as an ordinary notification on your phone. Orhan Hozek left home, expecting to complete a routine sale, something millions of people do every day. Instead, that ordinary transaction became the center of a murder investigation that would capture national attention. If this case made you rethink the risks of online meetups? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you appreciate true crime documentaries that focus on verified evidence instead of speculation, subscribe and join us for the next investigation. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories begin with the most ordinary decisions.